The third-party financing condition addendum, and we're going to talk about that header paragraph there. And I understand that some people don't understand it, so let's just go through it kind of slowly. Buyer shall apply promptly for all financing described below and make every reasonable effort to obtain approval for the financing approval, okay? That sentence is probably overlooked, but it has a lot of significance, all right? Buyer cannot just say, oh, I'm not going to apply for the financing or make any attempt to get it because I want to get out under this addendum. The buyer is required to make an attempt, make every reasonable effort to try to get the financing described in this addendum, okay? If they don't do that, they're in breach of the agreement. All right, buyer shall furnish all information and documents required by lender for financing approval. Now, what is financing approval, okay? Financing approval will be deemed to have been obtained when the terms of the loan described below are available and lender determines that buyer has satisfied all of lender's financial requirements, which are those items relating to buyer's assets, income, and credit history. All right, so buyer's credit worthiness. If buyer cannot obtain financing approval, buyer may give written notice to seller within blank days after the effective date of this contract, and this contract will terminate and the earnest money will be refunded to buyer. If buyer does not give such notice within the time required, this contract will no longer be subject to financing approval. Time is of the essence for this paragraph, and strict compliance with the time for performance is required. So, that addendum is only referring to the buyer's creditworthiness. The buyer's creditworthiness. It is not talking about the property's collateral. Yeah, it's not talking about the collateral. It's only talking about the buyer. All right? So if the buyer cannot get the financing because of something that's wrong with the buyer, then the buyer has the ability to terminate with this agreement or with this addendum. One of the contract, which always applies if you've checked the third-party financing box, okay? So this 4A1 does not have anything to do with that addendum. 4A1 reads as follows: property approval. If the property does not satisfy the lender's underwriting requirements for the loans, this contract will terminate and the earnest money will be refunded to buyer. The first thing you'll notice, there are no days specified in that paragraph. That provision lasts the duration of the contract. Okay, so if the property fails to meet the lender's underwriting requirements and you find out about it the day before closing, this contract terminates. But anyway, the contract does terminate if the property does not meet the lender's underwriting requirements, and that lasts the whole time. The issue that she's mentioning is that the buyers sometimes put too few days in the third-party financing condition addendum, and that really falls down, in my opinion, to good advice from an agent. If you put too few days in there, that's because the buyer's agent, in my opinion, probably didn't give them the best advice based on their own experience. But that's kind of my opinion.
I'm going to give a politician answer to the question, how many days should go in there, and that is, how many days is it going to take to get all of that together? Is the buyer a local buyer with a local job and credit that's always been here and they're doing pretty good and you don't have to chase down a divorce from an ex-wife that's on the mountain with the guru or something? I don't know. What are the circumstances? I don't know. Can you get it done in 10 days?
Yes.
Paint form that y'all are all familiar with should be presented to the seller at the time you take a listing and signed by both sellers if there are two sellers or three sellers, however many sellers there are, and dated at the time of the listing. And the listing agent should sign it and date it at the time of the listing. And then the buyer should sign that lead-based paint at the time of contract, and the buyer's agent should sign it at the time of contract. Because in the enforcement part of the EPA, is coming around and enforcing that, they're looking for the date that the seller signs to be sooner than the date the buyer signs. They're looking for all the signatures. So you need to pay attention to that one, because they are in the field checking your files.